America is celebrated as the land of the free, a country where every individual can control their own destiny.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Its citizens learn in one of the biggest publicly funded education systems on the planet. But unlike Britain, their national government has very little power over their 95,000 schools, and local freedom has spawned many competing approaches. I'm beginning my education road trip across the states in the rural Midwest, trying to understand this vast school system and the constant fights to control it. Where will my Odyssey take me? Is it right and then left? This is Nebraska, almost 1,000 miles from the coast in any direction. It's right in the middle of the States, but feels like the middle of nowhere. Out here you're free from the constraints of city life, free from the system, free from other people. It's 7 a.m. and I'm calling in at a remote farmstead to head into school with a local youngster, if my slick city boy wheels can get me up the driveway. 6-year-old Leah Anderson starts her day early. Before school, she's out feeding the deer in her back garden. Her parents, Terry and Andrea, have chosen a very independent way of life. You know the phrase that everybody around the world associates with America, the land of the free. Now, as Nebraskans, what does land of the free mean to you?
The way we're living. You tell people where you live and what you do, and they're envious. This is the way we choose to live.
Oh, wow, look at that. Across America, millions of families have their own definition of freedom, and the education system must cater for all of them.
Good job.
Wow. Do you ever miss anything? "89% of American students attend publicly funded state schools, and that's what the Andersons chose for Leah. At the tiny Olive Branch schoolhouse, you can see how the freedom Americans value is built into the very foundations of US education. This school has just 11 pupils in a single classroom, looked after by the multitasking Nancy Bess.
And this is a story. It's called The Great Chase. Can you read it to me? It's about Jake.
Education policy is set through the prized American principle of local control.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Power is exercised by a school district, controlled by an elected board and entirely independent of local government. They raise funds through local property taxes, set school budgets, and here they determine the local curriculum within state guidelines. City districts might run hundreds of schools for millions of children, but the district that set policy here looked after just these 11 kids. I asked Nancy Bess where she thought control should lie.
Well, I think it definitely needs to be local. The more local, I think, the better. They know the communities, they know what is best for their children.
But Nebraska is now merging tiny school districts like this into larger ones, reducing the power of parents like Terry.
Prior to this, if you had a problem, you'd call up your neighbor because he's the one that's on the school board, if you weren't on the school board. And you had a lot of direct control.
Every situation is not the same. You want to make all schools equal, and I want them all to be good schools, but not all the situations are the same, and I think that local control is the answer.
But whilst local parents might be losing some of their traditional influence here, teachers like Nancy Bess enjoy a remarkable degree of freedom. Nebraska is unique in the power that it gives classroom teachers over state testing. Now, Nancy, I'm a bit nervous. You've asked me to do a bit of assessment here. I'm, barely able to qualify as a human being. What's the secret of doing this successfully?
Okay, there is no secret. I gave
Nancy
you one
knows these state assessments inside out because she wrote them. Most states impose exams several times a year, but in Nebraska, teachers run continuous assessment with tests they have designed to meet state guidelines. Although it's an awful lot more work for you, is that kind of freedom one of the attractions of the job?
I think it is. Nebraska, I think, is the only state, I know it's the only state in the United States that does this, that gives you the freedom to create your own state test using their standards. Where if the state sent something out, they may test something that doesn't fit in our local curriculum. So it wouldn't be a fair assessment to the students. I think it's very important that they still have local assessments, and they have faith in us still that we can come up with the assessments that we feel are valid.
Could I ask you to read over this? You can read over it first, and then I'll ask you to read it out and carry out an assessment. Is that okay? Thanks. A justifiable degree of suspicion from the student exhibited there.
A new friend. Anna wanted to become a veterinarian. She loved animals and was always bringing
Phonetic awareness with
stray
beginning and
pets
ending
to
sounds.
the frightened animal. Sit still.
But these homegrown exams are also under threat. Not from my clumsy attempt to administer this one, but from a target-setting federal administration. So pass this on to Miss Bess immediately. To find out about their attempt to seize control, I'm going to have to head into town. So we've come in from the splendid isolation of rural Nebraska into Omaha, which isn't actually the capital. Lincoln is the capital, but it's a much bigger place. So the task in Omaha here is I'm hoping to speak to somebody who's really important, the Commissioner for State Schools in Nebraska. Constitutionally, education is a state matter, but many urban schools are failing, and the federal government want to increase their power to tackle the problems. In Washington in 2002, the Bush administration introduced No Child Left Behind, a federal bill which would standardize testing and reporting across America and kill off Nebraska's locally produced tests. In a Victorian schoolhouse in Omaha's Heritage Museum, I met Doug Christensen. He's a staunch defender of the Nebraskan way of doing things and one of the bill's fiercest critics. So Douglas, what's your problem with No Child Left Behind? It sounds like a high-principled initiative.
Well, it does sound like a high-principled initiative, but the theories of action, of implementation of it, are all wrong. And No Child Left Behind is probably the first evidence of industrial strength centralization of something that's always been a local, never state issue. And basically, I think the major theory of action behind No Child Left Behind is that the federal government knows better than we do what needs to be done in Nebraska, and that's simply unacceptable.
Well, why have they done this though? Because it's not like education's in the Constitution. Why has federal intervention happened at this stage?
If there's a reason why it exists, is because some states were not doing the job they needed to do. I think they were leaving children behind. And so we've got some states that need some help. They need some push. They need a kick. But is this the right way to do it? I don't think it's the right way to do it. Our system is one that honors the work of teachers. And we think that's the worst message that No Child Left Behind sends, is that it doesn't honor the work of educators. We're not forcing anything into the classroom. It begins there. We expect the rest of the system to embrace the classroom, and we think you can aggregate that accountability upward. It doesn't need to come from the outside or from the top down, and our teachers own this.
Doug won concessions that have allowed Nebraska to keep its local assessment. Other states rebel too, and No Child Left Behind looks likely to be revised. But the tension between national and local remains. There are two major social flashpoints in the states, religion and race, and both have sparked power battles in the schools. The African American population have not forgotten the injustices they suffered under slavery, then segregation. And the equality that they gained in the 60s has not translated into educational success for their children. Here in Omaha, like many urban areas across the states, almost half will fail to graduate high school. Dale Gines and his wife chose to opt out of the state system and home educate their children instead.
L6, so circle the letter.
What do you get out of educating your children at home as opposed to sending them to the local public school?
I think the main difference is I get to set their culture and their worldview. I can teach them about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey. And this way it gives me the flexibility to make sure that they know their basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also to teach them things that I know that they wouldn't normally learn in a public school system.
Has there been a failure in public schools in Omaha?
Omaha as a whole has over 25% of their high school graduates go on to get a bachelor's degree in college. In this particular area, it's only 7%. I think there's some organizational and bureaucratic issues that I don't think that are flexible enough to meet the demands of a minority population that's in a lower income bracket. If we get to the point where I feel that our schools are once again culturally sensitive, that are teaching broad range of American history instead of just the narrow history that they teach now, and they are committed to reducing the educational gaps, I would love to put my child or my children back in public school.
While Dale exercises control by withholding his kids from the public school system, I'm on my way to meet someone else who's trying to give the black community greater control of the system itself, and he's based in the Nebraskan State Senate. Now, if you're going to have a local government building, that's the sort of building you should have, a majestic chunk of American 30s deco, at the heart of which hopefully sits Senator Ernie Chambers. A veteran of the black civil rights movement, Ernie Chambers is the only black state senator in a very white state. Getting a feeling of Joseph Kafka. So many endless corridors, so many doors. Where is the Chambers chamber? The senator has triggered a national row with a bill that will split the Omaha school district in three, effectively creating separate white, Latino and black controlled areas. I'm keen to hear the man's plans, if I can find him. Right back where we started. Finally, Ernie's office is home to mountains of paper, a collection of dumbbells, and the immaculate Nicole. Could you tell us a little bit about your plans for the public schools in Omaha and the change around the districts, which will, I believe you hope, empower the people that actually live there?
Yes. Right now, there are in effect two education systems in Omaha. The white children go to one type of school, non-whites to the other. In the white schools, they have the more experienced teachers, the better equipment, adequate textbooks, funding, and all of the things that go along with the concept of a school. In the area where our children go to school, we get the teachers with the least experience. And when you look at the test scores, white children scored in the high 70 percentile, the black children in the mid 20 to low 20s.
And that's a kind of historical thing that hasn't changed, I believe.
And it's worse now than it had been 10 years ago. So my view is that until black people get the control and the governance of our schools, our children are always going to fail.
So how come you're Mr. Segregation as far as the media is concerned?
Segregation is here now. It always has been here, always will be. But what I'm saying, since the segregation will be here, we should nevertheless govern the education of our children in these segregated schools. Nobody is as concerned about your children as you are. The mistake of mistakes that black people made was when we ever ceded to white people the job of educating our children. We've never overcome it. We probably never will. And without education in this country or any other country, you have no chance. And when our children get to the 3rd grade and don't know how to read, in practical effect, they are lost forever. And I want to change it. And the only way we can do that is if we have control.
Ironically, Ernie's attempt to right what he sees as another racial injustice may be defeated by the very anti-segregation laws African Americans fought for. Power, it seems, isn't just about school results, but the big politics of race. I'm leaving Nebraska and heading south into Kansas. I'm on my way to look at the other battleground in US education after race, religion. America is a secular state, but has a lot of religious people. This tension came to a head in 1948 when the Supreme Court outlawed religious teaching in state schools. In some areas, worship of God had been a central part of school life, and many wish that it still was today. I had an appointment at the Independent Baptist Church in Clay Center with the fundamentalist Christian pastor Wilbur Schoenweiss. He's unhappy with the direction that state schools are going in.
Secularism has come into education. It's removed the public education system from that philosophy that the Bible has the answers. And it has developed the idea that man has the answers, science has the answers, and to me that's chaos. Let's go back to the scriptures.
The pastor teaches his congregation that the universe was entirely created by God, but state schools must teach evolution, a major concern for many Christians.
Here is a young person, a student. In public school, he's taught evolution. And he comes to church, he's taught creation. So he's forced to make a choice. What is the choice? Over here on this side, we have evolution based on man's understanding of who we are, where we are, what's going on here. Homosexuality, abortion.
The battle for control of the science curriculum would appear to be a battle for the soul of America's youth.
Naturalism and New Age, worship of the earth. Then over on the other side, where we're going to go with creation, we're going to have the Word of God as our foundation. Creation is going to be a central part of that, the central part of it. We're going to have family values, the value of human life rather than of abortion. But our system has been taken over by secularists. And as a result of that, we're losing our young people. In America, we're losing them in our communities, in our families.
The pastor's literalist views are extreme, but there are plenty of Americans who would sympathize. And some Christians in Kansas are fighting back. Just down the road, near a little village called Wakefield, lives a woman who is right in the front line.
You must be Kathy.
I'm Kathy.
Hi, I'm Peter.
Nice
Peter
to meet
Curran.
you.
Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Kathy Martin is a school teacher and staunch Roman Catholic.
Lovely, thanks very much.
In 2004, she was elected to the Kansas State Education Board. Kathy and her fellow board members used their mandate to change science standards across the state, encouraging the teaching of alternatives to evolution, such as intelligent design.
When they were trying to limit any kind of discussion which didn't completely endorse evolution, I thought that was a real red flag. Scientific discoveries are made because people have different ideas. And as long as it's scientific data, we certainly need to allow all scientific data, whether it supports or refutes a certain philosophy or a certain theory. I just don't think you can have good science unless you allow all viewpoints, especially if they're scientific data.
But Kathy has an unconventional view on what constitutes scientific data. She and her colleagues on the state board rewrote the definition of science to say that the search for facts shouldn't be limited to natural phenomena. In other words, scientists shouldn't ignore the supernatural. She believes that God should still have a place in the local state schools.
Well, you know, our national motto is "In God We Trust," and it's on all of our coins and our money. So it's, you know, it's not exactly a separation of church and state unless somebody makes a big fuss about it or something.
Unsurprisingly, the change in the science standards did cause a big fuss. Last year, the Christian campaigners were defeated at the school board polls, and alternatives to Darwin are currently off the curriculum. But in a strongly religious community, people find a way to keep the faith, as I discovered when Kathy took me to meet a group of local ladies and friends of hers from the world of teaching.
Pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Bless us, O Lord, in these thy gifts which we are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen.
There was a time when God was in school. Does it change an awful lot, do you think?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
They can't pray in school anymore. Can't use a prayer, period, in
They
school
don't read a
anymore.
Bible scripture or prayer
No,
intercom
no,
anymore.
just
like they
even
used
just
to.
a prayer.
But some of us got around it.
In my classroom, we still did, didn't we, Joe? We got around it. if
We got
want
around
to.
it. We have ways of getting around it. We could get around it by saying, my opinion is, and so we could get around it by making sure the kids understood that was our personal opinion, not something that we were teaching.
As an authority figure, we were.
Yeah.
And did you get any hate for this very clever way of
I never did.
keeping
I
the
never
faith?
did.
I never did.
It was pretty clear that these Christians felt free to help God find a place in the classrooms of Kansas, no matter what the Supreme Court might have said.
Somebody who's problematic.
We've been on the road for a week now, and we've almost reached our final destination here in the Midwest.
We're just driving into Milwaukee, and it's grey skies and light drizzle, which is why probably for the 50th time on our visit here, the hotel receptionist will say with a cheery voice, "I see you brought the English weather with you."
So far, we've seen battles to control teaching, budgets, and the curriculum. We're here to see a project designed to solve these problems of control, and it caused an ideological battle all of its own. This city is the home of a radical experiment that pushed the freedom of schools to the limit. Since 1990, the Milwaukee Voucher Choice program has handed control to individual parents. Deprived families here get a voucher to spend on the school of their choice, public or private. No more battles over what's best for them. The market will decide. I'd arranged to rendezvous with a man who got drawn into the dark side of the voucher experiment. Alan Borsuk is education correspondent for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. He'd offered to show me just how free market the Milwaukee voucher program really was.
There may be no place in the United States where it's easier to open a school, where the people running a school require less in the way of qualifications. If I wanted to open a school in Milwaukee, all I really need to do is get a place for it that meets the building inspector. That's the one inspector you gotta satisfy. But I don't really have to submit to anyone any notion of what my school's gonna teach, or who's gonna teach it, or anything like that.
Alan reported on around 15 schools that were either unfit to educate or actively defrauding the state. One principal had bought himself 2 brand new Mercedes with school funds. But Alan was taking me to the site of his favourite voucher school.
So I think this is probably the least school-like building I've ever seen in my life.
Well, I could probably show you worse.
Tell us about this place.
It was called Alex's Academics of English. The name itself is not grammatical. We published in our paper reports that students and staff both had used drugs during school time, and we had been told at different times they had almost no books, they had almost no program, the teachers were highly unqualified, some of them were high school dropouts themselves.
Ironically, it wasn't parental choice that put the place out of business. After it had gone through over $3 million of state funds, it was closed down for financial irregularities. Many of the parents, though, had seemed perfectly happy to leave their children there.
But one of the things we've learned in Milwaukee is that not all parents will make good choices, to say the least. In fact, some parents will not only make bad choices, they will stick with the bad choices. Perhaps because so many kids in Milwaukee come from dysfunctional homes where the parents, frankly, have very poor education themselves and are not perhaps capable of making a studied good choice of what's an appropriate education for my children.
Of course, for parents with vouchers, there are better schools to choose from. St. Marcus Lutheran is a rather more impressive option. Principal Henry Tyson has modelled this private school on the English public school he attended as a child. It's a highly disciplined establishment. I wondered how he felt about the failures that the voucher system had produced.
Gross abuse of the program. Embarrassing, unfortunate, sad. And yet, let's take a step back and look at urban education in America. The vast majority of students, the majority of students at the high school level that are African American in this city are not graduating. The graduation rates are stunningly low. And so something had to change. Yes, there still are problems with the voucher system, and so more regulation, especially in terms of finances, is critical. But we had to try something. The inherent beauty of the voucher system is it gives parents choice. If they want a very traditional education that is very rigid, very structured, very disciplined, they can come to a school like this. So in Milwaukee, in voucher schools alone, parents can choose between 116 or 118 schools. They can shop, they can find something if they want to that they're much more comfortable with.
The parents who choose to send their children here really are exercising control, and this market freedom could undermine the old state school system entirely.
This concept of having, here in Milwaukee, it'll now be 22,500 students being able to choose private schools. That's a fairly hefty dismantling of public education. And frankly, I think in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, the evidence will show that it has worked, or at least largely been successful.
In trying to work out who controls America's education system, I've realised it doesn't actually have one. It's got 14,000 of them in the form of the elected school districts. Freedom from central control allows many different approaches to schooling, but without it, the people of this huge country seem destined to fight forever over which approach is best.